not in a temple. Not on Olympus, in a bare skin, wrapped like meat, guarded by a woman with a serpent's tail instead of legs. The god is Zeus, king of the sky. And for a handful of days in the oldest stories the Greeks told, he cannot lift a hand to save himself. You stand at the mouth of that cave. The air smells of sulfur and old blood. Somewhere above you, the war that put Zeus on his throne is supposed to be over. He beat the Titans, the elder gods who ruled before him. He locked them in Tartarus, the pit beneath the pit, a prison so deep even light gives up before it arrives. He married power to order and called it a golden age. But Gaia, the earth herself, is not finished. She watched her children, the Titans, dragged into that pit by her own grandson. And out of grief, or fury, or something older than either, she goes to Tartarus itself and joins with it. What she bears from that union is not a god. It is not a Titan. It is the last weapon Earth has left. His name is Typhon. Hold that name, now let the story grow around it. The poet Hesiod, writing his Theogony around the 7th century, the oldest surviving Greek account of how the gods came to be, describes Typhon as something almost too large for a human voice to hold. 100 serpent heads rise from his shoulders. Black tongues flicker from every mouth. The sound he makes is not one sound. It shifts, mid-breath, from a bull's bellow to a lion's roar to a whimper a listening god might mistake for a puppy. Homer knew of him, too. In the Iliad, in a single line most readers skim past, Homer places Typhoeus beneath the earth in the land of the Eremoi. That single mention is proof. This monster was already old news by the time Homer's audience heard it. A name that needed no introduction. So what is he, exactly? He is Earth's answer to the gods who caged her children. A creature built to end a reign that had barely started. When Typhon rises, Hesiod says the sea boils and the sky itself catches fire. Later writers go further. The mythographer Apollodorus, compiling centuries of tradition into his Bibliotheca, sometime around the 1st or 2nd century CE, describes Typhon as tall enough to brush the stars, his arms stretching from one horizon to the other, his lower half a writhing knot of viper coils instead of legs, wings wide enough to blot out the sun. Every god on Olympus looks at that and does the only sane thing. They run. Apollodorus says they flee to Egypt and take the shapes of animals to hide. Apollo becomes a hawk, Hera a white cow, Dionysus a goat. It is an old Greek explanation for why Egyptian gods were carved and painted with animal heads. One god does not run. Zeus stays. He has thunder. He has a sickle of adamant, an unbreakable curved blade forged for exactly this kind of war. For one stretch of the Theogony, that seems to be enough. Thunderbolt after thunderbolt, until the earth groans and the monster falls. That would be a clean story. A king proves himself. The end. But that is not where the most famous version of this myth actually goes. And here is where most retellings quietly borrow a scene Hesiod never wrote, without ever saying so. In the version most people know today, the one recorded by Apollodorus 4 or 5 centuries after Hesiod, the fight does not go cleanly at all. Typhon wraps Zeus in his coils. He wrenches the sinews, the tendons that let a hand close into a fist, out of Zeus's own arms and legs. He leaves the king of the sky in a heap, unable to lift a finger, and carries the sinews away, rolled inside a bearskin, to a cave in Cilicia, in what is now southern Turkey. The Carishian cave, a real limestone cavern ancient travelers actually visited and wrote about. He sets a guard on them. Delphine, a Dracana, a serpent-bodied woman, half animal and half something worse. Zeus, for a while, cannot even stand. Sit with that. The king of all gods, reduced to a cripple in a cave that isn't even his, saved not by lightning but by a theft. But the older version of this story tells it differently. Hesiod's Theogony, the earliest full account that survives, never mentions the sinews, never mentions the cave, never shows Zeus as anything but victorious, from the first thunderbolt to the last. The helpless, captive Zeus, you may already know from other retellings, is not the original myth. It is a later layer laid onto a much older, simpler story of a god who wins outright. Both versions were told by real people in real places, centuries apart. Neither one cancels the other. But knowing which is oldest changes what the myth is actually about. Because if Zeus wins cleanly, the story is about power confirmed. If Zeus is crippled first and has to be rescued, the story is about power that is never fully safe, a throne that can be taken out from under him by something older than the gods themselves. In Apollodorus' telling, Zeus needs help. Hermes, the messenger god, and a goat-legged god named Aegipan slip into the Carytian cave while Delphine is distracted. They steal the sinews back. They fit them into Zeus, like a craftsman restringing a broken instrument. Now ask yourself what that means for a king of gods. His power was not simply his own. It could be cut out of him and hidden by an enemy. It had to be handed back to him by someone smaller, someone who moved in shadow instead of thunder. Zeus rises, and this time there is no clean single strike. There is a chase. He drives Typhon across the earth, over Thrace to a mountain called Hemus, where Typhon nearly kills him again, hurling whole peaks at Zeus's head. Zeus splits them apart in mid-air, with his thunderbolts. The blood from that clash, later writers claimed, is why the mountain range still runs red in places. The chase does not stop there. It runs south, all the way to Sicily. And this is where the myth stops being only a story about gods, and starts being a story about the ground under your feet. At Sicily, Zeus finally corners him. He tears a burning slab from the island itself and drops it onto Typhon's body, pinning him under the earth for good. The mountain that sits on that spot is Mount Etna, Europe's most active volcano, and it has been erupting, in one form or another, for as long as anyone nearby has kept records. The poet Pindar, writing in the 5th century BC, and the playwright Aeschylus, in Prometheus Bound, both describe the same idea. The fire and smoke pouring from Etna is Typhon's breath. The tremors shaking the region are his body straining under the weight of the mountain, still trying after everything to rise. Ask yourself what it would take to explain a mountain that breathes fire, centuries before anyone had a word for magma. You would need a monster large enough to fill it. You would need a war terrible enough to justify burying something alive under an entire island. The people who lived in Etna's shadow of ash and tremor were not writing a metaphor for its own sake. They were reaching for the only explanation that fit what they watched happen to their homes, season after season, the ground itself refusing to stay still. That is what this myth actually encodes. Not just a monster. A reason. A reason the world sometimes shakes for no cause anyone can see. A reason a coastline sometimes boils and burns with no warning at all. A reason a king who fought a whole war to bring order to the cosmos can still, for a handful of terrible days, be crippled in a cave and have to be rebuilt by smaller hands than his own. And that may be the real fear coiled inside this story. Not the 100 heads. Not the viper legs. The fear that no throne, however hard won, is ever finished being defended. That the thing you buried under a mountain is still down there, breathing. Somewhere under Mount Etna, that breath is still rising. The mountain has never once stopped answering it,